Overnight, bombs started falling, or actually attack drones started falling throughout the Russian territory, one of which actually struck an apartment building in Moscow itself, not too far from the Kremlin. The Ukraine launched its largest drone strike of the war against Russia, trying to bring home the war to the Russian people to show that they are not insulated. At least that's the intent. We're going to get into that more in a minute. But what we have to look at here is not just flashy video. We have to look at what's actually going on and what is the impact of the various activities that the Ukraine side is doing. What is the Russian side doing in response? And just where is the overall direction of the war going? Has this changed anything? Those are the key questions that have to be asked and answered. And what we're going to see, especially from the United States side, is a continued just unwillingness to look at the actual balance of power. And as I'm going to show toward the end of this episode here, I think it's very possible that Russia is preparing something very, very big in response. And that's something that we should be very concerned about. First of all, though, let's take a look at specifically what happened with this drone strike overnight. According to the Ukraine side, they launched 147 drones at Russia, which was the biggest single shot. I think it went through, and we'll hear in a second, I think maybe 7 or 8 different regions of Russia, one of which was Moscow. But according to all that we've seen so far, almost all of them were shot down, other than that one really a big flashy one that we just showed you some in Moscow. Apparently that's the only one that actually struck in Moscow, not a military target, just another apartment building like the one we saw in Saratov not long ago. And then apparently a couple of others elsewhere also hit, but it's unclear what, if anything, military-wise anyway, was damaged. So let's first of all look at what did Ukraine hope to accomplish with this strike here. And here we have Deutsche Welle, or DW, as you may have seen, talking about what it looks like from the Ukraine perspective.
These mid to long range drone attacks inside Russian territory, and those aims are various, not least of all to try to bring some of this war home to Russia, to try to affect people inside Russia and perhaps widen the debate there, or certainly the media coverage of this war. We know that Moscow and many Russian cities have largely been insulated from the war, unlike what we've been seeing on the ground here in Ukraine, and this is certainly an attempt by Ukraine to try to bring the war home. Another reason, of course, for these drone attacks is Kiev hasn't had the go-ahead from its Western allies to be able to use long-range weapons provided by the West. These drones are relatively cheap, and they are a way for Ukraine to be able to just go manage these long distances to get deep inside Russian territory.
So you see there that they want to, quote, bring home the war to Russia. You're going to hear that in a second echoed by an American commentator. But the bigger reason seems to be that they want to show that they can strike deeper into Russia, and to show the Western side, hey, I need something better than this, because drones, because they're so slow flying and they're easy to intercept, almost none of them get through. So they didn't have any tactical advantage. They apparently didn't even go after military targets. They went after civilian targets, the apartment buildings, which is a little bit puzzling, but maybe not. Because if you're trying to harm Russia's ability to wage war, then you would think you would go after airfields, energy supplies, energy stockpiles, those kinds of things, ammo depots, something that's going to actually harm the Russian war machine. But now even that has to have a big asterisk on it, because you have to have a sustained capacity and some kind of a reasonable capacity or chance to actually cause harm to the system. If you just have a couple of one-off pinpricks, it has no consequence. It has no impact at all. Because anytime you have a war going on between two major powers, you're going to have an understanding on either side that that's just a normal part of war, that you're going to lose some supplies, that you're going to have your supply lines interdicted here and there. And the issue is to be redundant in your positions, to have your different stockpiles spread throughout the country. So if they get hit in one place, there's several others, but you expect some of that to get hit. So this certainly wouldn't come as a surprise to the Russians. And in these small numbers, if 147, 2.5 full years into the war, you have the first biggest wave going in there, and almost none of them actually hit, and none of them hit military targets. then you have to ask, a question, what are you really trying to accomplish here? Now, if on the converse, Ukraine was trying to demonstrate to the Western people that, hey, look, we can fire into the Russia, but with these drones, all we're going to do is just get them shot down. We need your missiles that can evade some of the Russian air defenses more successfully than we have here. So that's why we want some of this. But we can't succeed without that. I don't know that's a that's a pretty lame reason if you're hoping to, because the West people are not going to be motivated by whether these drones get through or whether they don't. There's much bigger issues that are going to go into the decision-making process for the West. So if that was the intent, I'm not sure that that's going to have much of an impact at all on the Western people, certainly not on the Western leaders, which is the thing that matters the most. The next thing I want to look at here is what it looked like from the U.S. when they're, some of our experts are asked, exactly what is Ukraine trying to accomplish here. You have, all the useful people saying the same kinds of things. Jack Keane, we can always count on him for a good shot. Here he goes.
What are they really doing here? They want to bring the war to Russia. They want pressure on Putin because the people are going to recognize what's going on here. We're in the third year of this war. I thought this was going to be over quick. Now it's 3 years, and Ukraine has occupied 500 square miles of Russian territory, and they're bombing the suburbs of Moscow. That is going to get the people's attention.
That is, and we're going to see this in a minute from Victoria Nuland in a new interview. This is wishful thinking of the first order, that the Russian people are going to be scared because a drone hits an apartment building in Moscow. Look, if anything, it's going to make them mad. It's not going to make them scared. I mean, look, we're talking about the Russian people here. We're not talking about, I don't know, maybe we're projecting, maybe he's projecting that if it was U.S. people, if we got struck in Washington, D.C., in a suburb of Washington, maybe where I live here, that one of the apartment buildings gets hit and that we're going to be scared and we're going to be mad at our government. I mean, are you kidding me? Even us who were used to, complete free living because of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and the Canada and Mexico on our borders, and we have as much security as any nation on the planet has ever had. It's not going to make us scared. It's going to make us mad. I mean, can you imagine? Look what happened on 9/11. If you want any expectations, if you want to know what Americans do when they get struck on their territory, they don't cower. They get mad and want to do more. Why does anyone think that the Russians are different? I mean, this is fantasy thinking. I mean, just normal people in any country, anywhere, if you get attacked in your capital city, you're going to want to do something in retaliation. You're not going to want to cower and quake because of one thing. Look at the people of London in World War II with the Blitz. Did they cower when it was a massive aerial attack and rocket attack by the Germans? Of course not. All it did was strengthen their resolve and make them more angry and ready to do something. It always works out that way. So why do people like Jack Keane, who allegedly are experts in war, keep saying stuff that is absurd at face value and just the least amount of examination? I don't know. Can't speak for him. That's what he says. And apparently that's what a lot of the elite think. That's what they want you to think. But here's the weird part. You can't be actually this stupid. There's no way he is. He's very smart. And certainly he understands that this is going to make the Russians mad. And especially this one little one-off drone into an apartment building that killed one person is not going to make anyone afraid of anything. Certainly not going to point any fingers back at Russia. If the only thing that it may make for some of the people in Russia is, hey, Putin, what are you waiting on? Why do you keep holding yourself back? Unleash the army, unleash the Air Force to a really big strike. So I'm not sure if that is the response. I'm not sure these kinds of actions are going to be entirely useful for the Ukraine side. Also, more on that in just a second. But let's see what actually was the result. Here is also DW talking about some of the initial reaction in Moscow. Watch this.
It's clear that this was one of the most massive drone attacks on Russia since the beginning of the war. At least 9 regions, including the Moscow region, have been affected. And according to the Ministry of Defense, more than 140 drones were spotted there. And some of the drones hit residential buildings, as you said. And for example, in Ramenskoye, it is Moscow region, one woman was killed. And it is actually the first war-related death right next to the capital of Russia, to Moscow. And eyewitnesses say they couldn't sleep all night. They saw fireballs, and their houses were shaking. According to local authorities, hundreds of people have been evacuated.
So that's the immediate reaction. Of course, you had people evacuated. They didn't know. I saw some other interviews with some of the Russian people afterwards, who were in that apartment complex itself, and they were afraid that more were coming, and they were getting out of the apartment buildings. They were afraid they were going to catch on fire. All that kind of stuff. But again, that's the immediate reaction of a strike on a building. And I've been in Moscow before, and I've driven through. I mean, just like long stretches of these high-rise buildings are all over the place, especially on the outskirts of Moscow. And there's so many of them that you get one hit like this. It's not like everyone else in the country is going to start quaking in their boots, because they know that Russia has good air defense systems. They know these have been going on for a while, these kinds of drone strikes. Moscow itself has been hit a couple of times. You may recall last year there was one particular drone that literally got shot down over the Kremlin itself, and it was a night shot, and the thing gets blown up right over one of the buildings. That didn't cause Russia to quake then. Didn't cause them anything to quake this time either. And if you know anything about the Russian people, for crying out loud, even if you don't like them, even if you hate all the Russians, Putin and everybody on down, you have to at least acknowledge Russian history that shows that the Russian people are willing to take enormous suffering, enormous losses, and maintain support for their government and continue on. All kinds of governments that they've had. Even before the 1917 revolution that was sparked by World War I, it was years of fighting before the people actually revolted against the Tsar. And even then, it was after, I think, almost 5 million total casualties they had suffered. And they didn't turn against him earlier. And there was one big battle where they lost 250,000 people, and they still did not revolt against the government. They continued to fight on until the losses, got into the millions, and then they finally did. So one loss, probably not going to cause any of that to happen here. One incursion into the Kursk area, which is, literally a tiny little pinprick in terms of the Russian countryside. And it has been contained so far, and they're starting to move the Ukrainian side out. Actually, Dmitry Peskov announced today that apparently the Russians are starting an operation now to physically start moving that back. We'll see how that works out. They so far have been content to just from the distance using attack aviation, artillery, drones, mortars, rocket fire, of course, and some limited ground operations so far to cause casualties to the Ukraine side, to basically just increase the cost of them to maintain their perimeter inside there. But now it looks like that Russia is apparently going to start trying to physically move them out. We'll see. But that's going to lead us into something in a second ago that we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail the remainder of this episode here. What is Russia doing? Is Putin going to make any kind of big action, or is he just going to continue to methodically, move to the west and just slowly grind down the Ukraine army and just basically stay at this same pace until the war is finally won, even if it was a year, 2 years from now? That's what some have speculated. In fact, many people argue in the West that there hasn't been any, quote, big arrow movements by the Russian side because they can't. Because that they've maxed out their capability, and this is the best they can do, and inching along is all that they can produce. And so it's going to continue on like this, which continues to give the West more and more ability to say, yes, let's just increase more missiles. Let's increase long-range missiles into Russia. Let's let them use our stuff. That will slow them down. Even though there's no actual connection to a military strategy that would actually change anything on the battlefield. But that's what they argue anyway. But there's starting to emerge some evidence that maybe that's not what the Russians are doing. Maybe they're not limited to that. And in fact, they could be building up many things. Now, one of those things was exposed by Anthony Blinken just about 24 hours ago when he made an announcement that the Iranians have been helping Russia, not just with some drones, but now with missiles. Watch this.
Dozens of Russian military personnel have been trained in Iran to use the Fata 360 close-range ballistic missile system, which has a maximum range of 75 miles. Russia has now received shipments of these ballistic missiles and will likely use them within weeks in Ukraine against Ukrainians. In recent days, we've been sharing intelligence behind these findings with our allies and partners, and working together to ensure that there will be significant economic consequences for Tehran's actions. The United States will be announcing further sanctions on Iran later today, including additional measures on Iran Air. We expect allies and partners will be announcing their own new measures on Iran as well.
Oh yeah, that's going to do a lot. Let's sanction Iran. What are they going to do with these sanctions? Holy cow! Nobody knows about what it's like to be sanctioned by the United States. A third of the bloody planet is sanctioned by the United States. Everybody knows how to deal with that. And when you talk about sanctioning Russia and Iran, I mean, they already have hundreds, if not thousands, of various kinds of sanctions on them already. That's a perpetual part of their life. So, I mean, they're going to laugh at that. What more can you do? And you see that all the other sanctions, and certainly all the ones on Russia, have rebounded and, in fact, caused more harm to our allies in Europe than it has to Russia, whose economy is growing faster than that of the Western Europe. So sanctions are just not going to cause any problems there. And if that's our only response, it just makes us look feckless and weak. And let's take a look at the substance of that. So we know that Iran has been helping Russia with drone warfare since almost the beginning. And that has really accelerated and expanded, with some production reportedly being done both in Ukraine and in Russia. And they have spread that out throughout. So we know that's already been going on. Now, all of a sudden, you're talking about missiles as well. And look, what does anybody think's going to happen with this? I know that we love to say, oh, this shows how weak Russia is, that they have to go out and get help from Iran and from North Korea. They can't handle Ukraine on their own. Well, are they handling Ukraine on their own? In fact, is Ukraine on its own? Or is there, like we've seen just last week in Ramstein, Germany, with the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, bragging about how 50 nations are on the side of Ukraine doing stuff like this.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's not kid ourselves. Putin will not stop at Ukraine. But as President Biden has said, Ukraine can stop Putin if we stand with Ukraine and provide the weapons that it needs to defend itself. Ukraine's survival is on the line, and all of our security is on the line. So we will continue to stand together to resist Putin's campaign of conquest, and we will continue to keep the faith with the people of Ukraine.
I mean, what do we think is going to happen if 50 nations, and we brag about this every month, are going to go and going to help Ukraine to give them all kinds of stuff, long-range missiles, tanks, armor personnel carriers, millions of rounds of ammunition, now F-16 fighter jets, intelligence support, all of these things, everything except, at least so far, manpower on the ground. What do you think Russia's going to do? So it's not Russia against little Ukraine. It's Russia against the combined military and industrial capacity of the West, not just even of NATO, because there's others involved as well. So it's 50 nations that are involved in this. So Russia is going to now do what it can. So we know that they've been getting various kinds of covert support from China, even though China has not expressly given military aid to the Russians so far anyway. But others have. So in addition to Iran, there's also North Korea. And in this report from I believe it was Reuters yesterday, Gary, if you can throw that news report up there, that the North Korean, yes, from Reuters, North Korean weapons extending Russian stockpiles, German general says. And this is one of the first clues. I was telling you about what is Russia going to do? Where's all this going? This is another clue here, because this German general has said, the amount of ammunition that Russia is getting from the likes of North Korea, and now from expanding arsenals from Iran, you look at the front line and you're thinking, I just don't see that many more weapons going on. And according to this article here, there have been, since North Korea, made an agreement to help Russia, they have gotten 16,500 shipping containers full of some various kinds of military weapons, ammunitions, and supplies from you. Of course, no one knows what's inside of them, but our satellites, we can count them. Folks, just imagine how much stuff that is. I mean, these are the kind of containers you see that are on the back of 18-wheelers rolling down the highway. 16,500 of those things have already gone to Russia, and the pipeline is just rolling. Where is all that going? Because simultaneous with that, You also have an expansion of the Russian ability to wage and sustain war of their own. And they are now cranking out, by some reports, up to 4.5 million artillery shells of 152 and 122 millimeter calibers every year. And that capacity continues to expand. They're building 100,000 drones per month, actually, right now. Now that reportedly is beat even by that on the Ukraine side, but the Russian electronic warfare capacity is expanding also, which is minimizing and neutralizing an increasing percentage of the Ukrainian drones. But that is not happening in reverse. Russia's increasing their numbers, and while Ukraine is trying its electronic warfare capacity and expanding it, it's not knocking down that many of the Russians. So the net is an expanding Russian capacity on the ground for drones on top of this huge advantage they already have in artillery. But here's the point that I'm trying to draw to you. You don't see on the front lines any huge increase in the amount of firepower. They have a steady number of artillery shells they've been using for quite some time now, but that's not commensurate with how many they're getting from North Korea, drones from Iran, missiles from both of them, and their own domestic production. And I didn't even mention, but also their own domestic production of like the Iskander missiles, some of these other hypersonic missiles, the glide bombs that we keep showing you a lot of. I mean, you're talking a massive amount of equipment has been brought in or developed and built inside Russia. But where is it? Where is it going? And that's one of the big concerns, that this is actually Russia is preparing a big aero offensive. Now, we've already talked to you a little bit in the past that there's been a lot of Belarusian troops seen massing on the border north of Ukraine. They are not just there, but they're equipped with drone nets and anti-drone capabilities, like they're ready to engage in this kind of warfare. The same things that you see on the Russian tanks, Russian armored personnel carriers, et cetera. And you've also seen reports by the Ukrainian side that their intelligence has said up to 250,000 Russian troops are in and around that whole arc that's on the southern side of Russia and the northern side of Ukraine that have not been engaged. Specifically in this area of the Kursk operation, we have not seen large numbers of Russian troops do anything on the ground. We saw a report that another 30,000 Russian troops were moved in the area of the border, but to date, we have still not seen them engage on there. And one has to ask the question, why is that? What is going on the Russian side? Why are all these troops moving around the border, but they're not engaging in the areas where the fight's been going on? And there is some suggestion in some quarters that Russia and China are really, really keen on getting this BRICS meeting conducted late next month in October in Kazan, Russia. And that the economic development that these guys are putting together to expand their numbers, to expand their economic potential, especially in the global south, apparently, and this is according to open source stuff from the Chinese side, that this is really, really important to Xi Jinping personally. And there is evidence to suggest that if Russia was going to do a big aero movement, that it would wait until after that meeting to execute, because Xi and Putin don't want to do anything to upset that before it happens. Many have also suggested that this incursion into Russia is going to make it easier for them to maintain this political expansion, because it's now saying, look, even the Russian heartland was actually attacked and invaded by the Ukrainian side here, and any nation is going to react when its territory gets penetrated, as this has here. And so even though Russia is the one that definitely invaded Ukraine in 2022, now then this incursion into them, these attacks into their capital city that made a big splash, which are designed to make Russia look bad, which is designed to help the West, could actually have a perverse counter effect on other people in the world who are not, pro one side or the other, to think, okay, well, if the Ukraine side is just launching a bunch of missiles and everything else into civilian areas and hitting apartment complexes, attacking into the territory, everyone is going to defend themselves. So the concerns about Russia go down, because they're saying, well, we would do the same thing. And you don't want to make it easier on your opponent to actually launch a big operation and not look like, the big bully. And actually, Russia doesn't care about whether they look like anything. We worry too much about impressions in the West, frankly, to our demise, because we think that matters. But when the cold, hard calculations of war, the only thing that matters is not the spin. It's not the claims by anybody. It's not these grandiose kinds of commentary by the likes of Victoria Nuland, I'm going to show you in a minute, but on the cold, hard frontline realities. And let's just take a look real quick at what some of those realities are. I wanted to give you an update on a couple of areas in the especially in the Pokrovsk area, because we've had continued to be advancements in this Ukrainsk area here. The Russians continue to push south of this city to cut it off, and it's a real important one to other units in this area. And as I've also told you, the Ukraine units in this pocket here are under increasing pressure. And so Russia has now been pushing out into the direction of this city here, or this little village, Hernek. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But then you see also Russia is pushing forward in this area here, just to the south of that. And now additional forward movement here, making a mini pocket here to where, again, the Ukraine troops are going to have to either be encircled or they're going to have to withdraw here. And as these move forward, this pincher here in the south and these here in the north, the gap allowed to the Ukraine side to withdraw gets closer. And if they don't move pretty quickly, they could lose all of these brigades that are inside here, because then once this cauldron closes, then it's the same thing as Bakhmut or Avdiivka or some of these other places, Lysychansk, before that, where once they get surrounded, it's game over. And it's just a matter of time before the area is reduced, and then all the troops are destroyed or taken captive. So things continue to go bad there, but they're also up here in Selidova. There's also some issues where the Russians are continuing to advance. And then on the other side of the Pokrovsk penetration, they're going further and further advancing here. Everywhere you want to look all across here, the Russians continue to make advances, especially here in the Novokhodivka area, which, as we showed you before, is barely 8 kilometers away from Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk, the city, is already in range of Russian artillery, Russian drones, Russian aviation. So these 7 road and rail nets that are coming out of there are already under interdiction. And the further Russia gets up here, the more they can bring them under fire control, which will be almost as effective for the Russians as actually taking the city itself. Now, I want to show you why Pokrovsk is so important by showing you a separate map here. This is Weeb Union. We show him a lot, but this particular screenshot of the map that he's showing here, let me blow that up a little bit. It shows you this is the Pokrovsk area we were just looking at, and here's some of the advances in the pocket that I described here. But I want you to look at something else here. These are these yellow things that you see all along the map here. These were Ukrainian defensive lines, most of which were built back in the 2014 era. And all the way through here. And you see a lot of them all up in this area here. And the Russians have gone through all of these. But I want you to look beyond Pokrovsk, and you see a whole lot less of any kind of fortification, some a little bit back here. But in comparison to the density and certainly the time that was built of these up here is a lot less. And so Russia has chosen to try this big penetration here so that they can bypass the rest of these that were in these areas and go into areas like this where there's just small little dots. And by the way, these are relatively new fortifications that have not been very well constructed. They don't have the money or the time or the resources. So if Russia makes a penetration beyond the Pokrovsk area, which is right here, then some of these other troops that are apparently back in this area here that have not been used for strategic exploitation forces, we call them, they could then make some large scale movements. Because look at this, folks. Look at all this area here. You don't see any yellow dots in this area at all. This is the last band that you see, and these here are pretty small. So Russia has been doing a lot more to bypass a lot of these areas and made a lot of really big improvements in their tactical capacity than we've seen at any point in the first year and a half or so of the war. So all these things show that Russia apparently has learned a lot tactically. Not apparently, they have learned a lot tactically. But you see a lot of these other things starting to line up that show they're getting ready to go and do something big. We've shown you in the last week or 10 days, Sergei Lavrov, their foreign minister, who has made some explicit warnings to the United States. Don't think that you're safe because of your oceans and your north and south countries. They're friendly countries there. because if we get into a big war, nobody's going to be safe. And if you think you're going to use nuclear weapons against us, we have the bigger nuclear arsenal and we are not afraid to use it. Now, why would he suddenly say that at the 2.5-year mark when they've been making some of those comments periodically, unless they think that something may come soon that may prompt the West to again think about using nuclear weapons? Now, as has been recently revealed by the director of the CIA, Burns, he admitted the other day, I think it was on September 4th, in a meeting, public meeting with MI6, that he says that Russia was very close to using tactical nuclear weapons in 2022 when they lost some of that territory. Jim Sciutto has reported on that in CNN in a book that he wrote actually 4 or 5 months back. So it's not exactly new, but it is interesting to hear from the CIA director, who, of course, arrogantly claimed, well, this is actually to show that the Russians that, if you use nuclear weapons, we're going to pound you with nuclear weapons. So you better not do it, and they back down is his implication there. And if they do it again, we'll back down. Well, I'm telling you, folks, we don't want to get into a game of nuclear chicken. That is not just foolish, it's absurd at the highest order that you would even think about getting into a nuclear game of chicken. Why would we want to do that? It doesn't make any sense at all. There is nothing to gain in the United States. Just imagine if we kept going down that path and we actually got into a game of nuclear chicken. Let's say that Russia launches this big offensive sometime this fall after the BRICS meeting, as some evidence is starting to sign up, and they start to succeed because these brittle lines that we've just shown you break somewhere because Russia floods the zone with a huge number of missiles and artillery and manpower that they have heretofore not used in those kinds of numbers, and they literally start breaking through, or they maybe make another move on Kiev or Kharkiv City, something along those lines, where there's smaller lines of communication coming in from their side, and they actually start succeeding. What is the West going to do? I've mentioned this before, but I want to repeat it because it's so important. You're going to be faced as the West with either acknowledging that all of our efforts for 2.5, close to 3 years by that time, were utterly failure, and that everything we tried not only lost the war for the Ukraine side, not only prevented them from hanging on, but left Russia in a more powerful position. Because just imagine the outcome of this. If Russia wins the war, and I mean just an actual military victory, which is now possible, if they win the war, they're going to come out looking really good. And this whole issue with BRICS is going to make more people want to join BRICS and leave the Western world behind, because they're going to see the West as weaker or unstable or delusional and not able to make rational decisions. And they're not going to want to tie their future to somebody who can't make wise decisions. And they're going to go over more to this area. We're already seeing signs of that. In the global South, especially, large percentages of the world are already interested in, and many will be sending representatives to this BRICS meeting here about potential future joining the bloc. We would be faced with, that's one course of action, to where we just acknowledge that's what happened, and then just close it off and just say this is a terrible chapter, but let's take care of ourselves here. Let's shore up the eastern flank of NATO. Let's make sure that Russia doesn't go any further, and all that kind of stuff. That's one course of action. The other course of action, which I think is much more alarming and as possible, is that we would try to double down on it. And we would not be willing to suck down humility. We would not be able to stop with the arrogance. And we would say, oh, no. I got nuclear weapons here. I've got powerful response here, and I'm not going to allow Russia to win. So we're going to escalate, maybe with Western troops in the western part of Ukraine, maybe with tactical nuclear weapons of our own, or getting involved in other ways directly that might spawn a Russian nuclear weapon, and then think that we're going to get into that again, game of chicken. That's what I worry about more. And let me show you one of the reasons why I worry about that kind of an outcome from the West, because we still, to this day, have delusional thinking that we just can't see things the way they are. This is an interview with Victoria Nuland, who was a former high-ranking State Department official, is infamous because she was involved with the support of the overthrow of the Ukrainian government in 2013, 2014. So she's kind of infamous for that. But nevertheless, she does represent what the current administration thinks, because she worked for the administration. and still talked to or still listened to quite a lot today. Now, this particular interview here was done with a Russian YouTuber who's anti-Putin. So we'll just put that out there so you understand the context of who's talking here. But that's not important. What is important is what Newland said, and she's going to be talking about here about what happened in the current situation and what may happen in the future. Watch this.
In the beginning, a lot of Russians were really scared of exit visas as they existed in the Soviet Union.
And why didn't he close the borders? Because he's afraid of a revolt among his own people. Why doesn't he do universal conscription? Because he knows that if he starts sending the boys of Moscow and St. Petersburg to Kyiv, that the country will revolt under him. He's afraid of his own people, and he's afraid that fundamentally, if they truly understood that he's spending 25% of the wealth of the nation on this crazy imperial dream of his own, that he wants to be Peter the Great, and he wants to be Peter the Great and Catherine in territorial terms.
Ivan the Terrible, yeah.
Ivan the Terrible. Rather than being a guy after 5 terms who leaves a legacy of greatness in terms of economic muscle, in terms of science, in terms of technology, all of those things. And he's stealing the future from you and your kids.
That is just pure, just insanity to think that the Russians believe that Putin is just out to be Peter the Great, that he's just, I don't know, he's sitting around one day, didn't have anything else to do. And he's like, you know what? Hey, let's go invade Ukraine. That'll be cool. And then I'll be great. I mean, that's the character that she's trying to portray there. But other than the West, where that actually is received quite well, that's why it goes to speeches all the time, and probably does quite well in her speech making there. But that's just eaten up by Western audiences, because it feeds our desire to say, yeah, Russia's just an evil man. The Putin is an evil man, that Russia is a terrible place, and all they want to do is be Hitler wannabes or Peter the Great, Ivan the Terrible, whatever name you want to use. But that has no relation to reality. The Russians, look, Putin is still supported as recently as last month by 72%. He's got a 72% approval rating. What leader on the planet has that kind of approval, especially in the West? None of them. I mean, they would kill to get that kind of number. They don't have it. And the reason why they support him is because they see, like that soundbite I put you from of Lloyd Austin about the Ramstein meeting, where 50 nations are arrayed against Russia, where a Russian territory has been invaded in the Kursk region, where the capital city has been attacked, where other cities in the south have been attacked, Belgorod, Saratov, and in numerous of these villages in the Kursk area. They see that, and they say that's real. That's not spin. That's not anything else. That's actually happening. And so why does anyone in the West ever have this fantasy that the Russian people will turn against their leader when other nations are moving against him, when Russians already have a fear of being invaded from the West? That's the whole reason they went to war in the first place, was because the Western military alliance wanted to come up to the very heartland of Russia, right down these plains where an invasion has happened in the past, at least 2 times in recent centuries, and where it could happen in the future. That's what the Russians actually see. That's how they actually view things in the main. Of course, there are always going to be exceptions, like this apparently this YouTuber here, and many others that don't like it and are against it. But they're a very small minority. You have to make your calculations based on what the mass of people in Russia actually think. And when you take your actions, you have to imagine what are the counteractions, and would they be harmful to your side? And if you think that it would, like if we continue to allow more long-range stuff to be used, or if we ever get into a direct fight with Russia, that it's going to be very detrimental to our interest. And in a worst-case scenario, nuclear weapons are falling on Western cities. That's not theoretical, or that it's not so hypothetical, something that would never happen. It's very plausible. We don't need to go down this path any further. We need to do what's rational and sane. And unfortunately, keep showing you evidence, whether it's America's senior officials currently serving, those who had served, those who, former military people like Jack Keane that I keep putting up on here. you see that across the board, the elite in the West continue to say these kinds of things and apparently believe them, or at least they're acting on them. Whether they believe it or not, it's hard to know, but you can see that the actions are taken indicates that to some level, they actually believe this insanity. Now, there is some reasons for some hope, because there have been some additional recent comments from the leader of Hungary and the leader of Germany. Chancellor Scholz has now kind of changed his tune a little bit, and he's saying, you know what, we need to accelerate negotiations. We need to accelerate talking about ways to end this. So maybe there's hope that along with Fico in Slovakia and some others in Europe who want this war to be over. Turkey, of course, wants it to be over. So maybe those numbers will start growing. And we can only hope that some kind of sane thought will start to animate the leaders of Western Europe, who hopefully see the realities that we're talking about here today. And in this absurd move that we have, getting closer and closer to having to make that hard decision. And if Russia does make good on these, pieces of evidence that we can see starting to pile up, that they may do something big in the future, which may succeed in ways that are catastrophic for Western interests, we better hope that people like Scholz and the Hungarian leader and some of these others, even the Turkish leader, that they actually are able to hold in check some of the worst impulses of the Victoria Nulands or the Anthony Blinkens of the world. We'll have to hope that happens. But if anything, you're going to know what's coming, and you're going to know the realities here, so that if these things start to unfold as we're talking about here, you're going to be equipped and prepared. And we'll be, again, asking you to share this with everybody you know, making sure that the truth gets out there, because we are unafraid and unintimidated. We will continue to bring you the truth, no matter what it is, every step of the way. Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Ask you to like and to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And I really want to highlight this. This is going to be a great show this afternoon. Former IDF soldier and historian Omar Bartov, who is a professor at an American university, but also has recently spent some time by what he saw on the ground in Israel. And from a perspective of someone who loves his country, fought for it, you're not going to want to miss what he has to say based on his observations of late. Tune into that at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. Today, and we will see you at that time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.